At 18, Maya Ward had $41, a garbage bag of clothes, and no one in the world who wanted her. Her mother had died when she was 4. Her father disappeared 2 years later. The aunt who took her in gave her up to the state within the year and never came back. She had no family left. That's what she believed until a letter arrived from a lawyer in a town she'd never heard of, telling her that a grandmother she never knew existed had died 8 months earlier and left her a restaurant, closed and sitting empty for 3 years. Maya took a bus 200 miles south, walked through a town where nobody knew her name, and turned a key in a rusted lock. The door swung open. What she found waiting inside wasn't an empty building. But we need to go back to the beginning, back to the morning everything started, when Maya Ward woke up for the last time in a bed that was never really hers. The group home smelled like industrial cleaner and burnt toast. Maya had been awake since 5, lying still in the narrow bed she had slept in for 2 years, listening to the younger girl stir in the room next door. She counted ceiling tiles the way she always did when she couldn't sleep, 14 across, 9 down, 126 tiles between her and the world that didn't want her. At 7, a staff member named Karen knocked on her door. "Today's the day, Maya. You've got until noon to clear out." Maya didn't answer. She was already packed. Everything she owned fit inside a black garbage bag and a backpack with a broken zipper. 3 shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, underwear, a toothbrush, a library card from the Charlotte public system, and a cracked jade pendant on a thin silver chain. The pendant had been her mother's. One of the older foster mothers, a woman named Mrs. Reeves, had given it to Maya when she was 10, pulling it from an envelope of personal effects that had traveled through the system alongside Maya for years. "This belonged to your mama," Mrs. Reeves had said. "She'd want you to have it." Maya clasped the pendant around her neck and pulled on her cleanest shirt. She checked the small envelope in her backpack's front pocket. $41. Tips she had saved from helping in the group home kitchen where she peeled potatoes and washed dishes for $2 an hour under the table. She had been saving for months without knowing what she was saving for. Now she knew. She was saving for whatever came after this. She carried her things downstairs. In the front office, Karen slid a manila folder across the desk. Birth certificate, medical records, a list of social services phone numbers printed on yellow paper. "You should call the housing line," Karen said. "They can sometimes place people in transitional shelters." "Thank you," Maya said. "Do you have somewhere to go?" "I'll figure it out." Karen's mouth tightened. She had seen this scene play out dozens of times. The kids who walked out that door with a garbage bag and a brave face and no idea what came next. Some found their way. Most didn't. Karen reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a granola bar. "Take this, and Maya, be careful out there." Maya took the granola bar and walked out the front door into a March morning that couldn't decide if it was winter or spring. The air was cold, but the sun was out. She stood on the sidewalk with her garbage bag in one hand and her backpack hanging off one shoulder, and felt the full weight of being nowhere. She had no apartment, no job lined up, no family, no plan beyond making it through today without spending more than she had to. She walked 6 blocks to the public library. It opened at 9, and Maya had spent more hours inside that building than anywhere else in Charlotte. The stacks were warm and quiet, and nobody asked you to leave as long as you were reading. The librarian at the front desk, a woman named Ms. Chen, looked up when Maya came through the door. "Maya." Miss Chen's eyes moved to the garbage bag. She understood immediately. "Today," Maya nodded. "Come sit down. I have something for you." Miss Chen disappeared into the back office and returned with a white envelope. "This came yesterday, addressed to you care of the library. I wasn't sure what to make of it, but the return address is a law firm." Maya took the envelope and turned it over. The return address read, Harrison and Associates, Attorneys at Law, Millbrook, North Carolina. She had never heard of Millbrook. She didn't know anyone named Harrison. She opened it carefully, pulling out a single typed page and a small brass key taped to a piece of cardboard. The letter was dated 3 weeks earlier. "Dear Miss Ward," it began, "my name is David Harrison, and I am the executor of the estate of June Palmer, who passed away on July 14th of last year. Mrs. Palmer was your maternal grandmother. She left specific instructions in her will that upon your 18th birthday, you were to receive full ownership of her property at 412 Sycamore Street, Millbrook, North Carolina, known locally as June's Kitchen. The enclosed key opens the front door. Mrs. Palmer asked that I convey the following message. Tell her I never stopped looking. Tell her the door is open." Maya read the letter 3 times. The words didn't change, but their meaning kept shifting, rearranging itself in her mind. Maternal grandmother. She had a grandmother. Had. The woman was dead. Had been dead for 8 months, and she had left Maya a restaurant. Maya? Miss Chen's voice cut through the fog. Are you all right? I have a grandmother, Maya said. The past tense caught in her throat. I had a grandmother. Miss Chen came around the desk and read the letter over Maya's shoulder. Her hand went to her mouth. Millbrook. That's about 3 hours south of here, near the Uwharrie Forest, small town. She left me a restaurant. She left you a home, Ms. Chen corrected quietly. Maya stared at the key taped to the cardboard. It was old brass, slightly tarnished, with a simple cut, the kind of key that opens something solid. She pulled it free and held it in her palm, feeling its weight. She had been told her mother's family wanted nothing to do with her. That was the story she grew up with, repeated by caseworkers and foster parents in the careful, pitying tone reserved for children whose histories were too sad to examine closely. Your mama's people are gone, honey. There's no one on that side. It had never occurred to Maya to question it. When you grow up in the system, you learn early that asking about your family only leads to dead ends and silence. You stop asking. But now here was a key and a letter from a dead woman who shared her blood. A woman who had apparently been looking for her, and the story Maya had carried for 14 years cracked right down the middle. I need to get to Millbrook, she said. Miss Chen drove her to the Greyhound station and bought her a ticket. Maya tried to refuse, but Miss Chen pressed the ticket into her hand. You can pay me back when you're settled. Go find out what's waiting for you. The bus left Charlotte at 11:15 in the morning. Maya sat by the window with her garbage bag on the seat beside her and the key in her front pocket, pressing against her thigh. The city thinned and fell away. Shopping centers gave way to pine forests. The highway narrowed from 6 lanes to 4 to 2. Red clay shoulders appeared along the roadside, and farmland opened up in broad, flat stretches, broken by barns and silos and the occasional church steeple. Maya ate the granola bar and watched the world change through fingerprinted glass. She didn't know what she was heading toward. A restaurant, an empty building, the ghost of a woman she had never met. It could be nothing. It could be another dead end in a life full of them. But the key was real, and the letter said her grandmother had never stopped looking, and that was more than anyone had ever offered Maya before. The bus pulled into Millbrook just after 2 in the afternoon. The stop wasn't a station, just a bench and a sign on the shoulder of the main road through town. Maya stepped off with her garbage bag and her backpack and stood blinking in the afternoon sun. Millbrook was small. One main street lined with brick storefronts, some occupied and some empty. A hardware store, a diner with a hand-painted sign that read Rosie's, a post office, a church with a white steeple at the far end. Pickup trucks angled along the curb. A few people moved along the sidewalks. It was quiet in a way that felt intentional, like the town had decided long ago that noise was unnecessary. Maya walked. She had the address from the letter, 412 Sycamore Street. A woman coming out of the post office pointed her in the right direction. 2 blocks down, take a left. You can't miss it. She found it on the corner of Sycamore and Main. A single-story brick building with a wide front window and a painted sign above the door that read, June's Kitchen in faded green letters. The building was old but not ruined. The brickwork was clean. The window glass was intact. The small concrete step in front of the door had been swept recently. Someone had been taking care of this place. Maya stood on the sidewalk and looked at the building for a long time. A restaurant her grandmother had run for nearly 20 years. A restaurant built on recipes Maya had never tasted, in a town Maya had never visited, by a woman Maya had never known. And now it belonged to her, an 18-year-old with $41 and a garbage bag. She pulled the key from her pocket. The brass was warm from her body heat. She climbed the single step, fitted the key into the lock, and turned it. The mechanism resisted, then gave way with a heavy click. She pushed the door open. The smell hit her first, not dust or mildew or decay. Something else. Lemon oil and old wood, and underneath it all, the faintest trace of cooking spices. Cumin and garlic, and something sweet she couldn't name. The restaurant smelled like someone had been cooking in it recently, though the letter said it had been closed for 3 years. Maya stepped inside. Late afternoon light slanted through the front window, casting long gold rectangles across the floor. The dining room was small, maybe 10 tables, each covered with a white tablecloth protected by clear plastic. The chairs were wooden, mismatched, but sturdy, pushed neatly into place. A long counter with 6 stools ran along the left wall, backed by a pass-through window into the kitchen. Everything was clean, not just preserved, but maintained. No cobwebs, no dust on the tables. The floor had been mopped, the windows had been washed. Someone had been coming in here, keeping this place alive while it waited. But it was the walls that stopped Maya cold. Every wall was covered in framed photographs, dozens of them. And in photograph after photograph, the same face looked back at her. A young woman with dark hair and a wide smile and Maya's exact jawline. Maya's exact eyes. Her mother. Lily Palmer at maybe 20 years old, laughing in a kitchen with flour on her nose. Lily standing in front of this very building on what must have been opening day, a banner behind her reading, "Grand Opening." Lily holding a baby wrapped in a yellow blanket. Maya recognized the blanket from a photo she had seen once in a caseworker's file. That baby was her. Maya's legs went soft. She grabbed the edge of the counter and held on. Her mother was everywhere in this room. Every wall, every surface, every corner. June had turned this restaurant into a gallery of Lily's life, a place where her daughter would never be forgotten, where anyone who walked through the door would know who Lily Palmer was, and that she had been loved. Maya walked along the walls slowly, studying each photograph. Lily as a teenager, sitting on a porch railing with a guitar. Lily in a graduation cap and gown. Lily in this kitchen, stirring something in a massive pot, looking over her shoulder at the camera with a grin. Lily holding baby Maya on her hip, both of them squinting into the sun. In every picture, Lily looked happy. She looked like someone who had been deeply, unquestionably loved. Maya reached the end of the counter where the photograph stopped and a clean stretch of wall began. There, pinned to a small corkboard, was a single handwritten note on yellow paper. "This wall is for Maya's pictures, when she comes home." The air went out of her chest. An empty wall, waiting for her, waiting for photos that didn't exist yet, of a life she hadn't lived yet, in a place she didn't know was hers. June had left a space for her, a literal, physical space on the wall of this restaurant, reserved for a granddaughter the world had told her was dead. Maya pressed her palm flat against the empty wall and felt the cool plaster under her fingers. She stayed like that for a long time. When she finally turned around, she noticed something she had missed. On the counter, beside the cash register, sat a sealed envelope, cream-colored, thick, the kind meant for important documents. Across the front, in careful cursive handwriting, someone had written, "For Maya when she comes home." Maya picked it up. The paper was heavy in her hands. She could feel something inside beyond just a letter. Something stiff, like a photograph or a card. She ran her thumb under the seal. The envelope opened. Inside was a folded letter, several pages long, written in the same careful handwriting. And tucked behind the letter, a photograph she had never seen. A woman in her 60s, silver-haired and thin-faced, standing in the doorway of this restaurant with her arms open wide. On the back, in pencil, June Palmer, 2019. Waiting. Maya unfolded the first page of the letter. The handwriting was steady, but the ink had slight tremors in the longer strokes, the marks of a hand that was growing tired. "My dearest Maya," it began. "If you are reading this, then you found your way here just like I always believed you would." Maya's hands were shaking. She lowered herself onto one of the counter stools and smoothed the letter flat on the surface in front of her. The restaurant was silent around her. Photographs of her mother watched from every wall. Late sun poured through the window. And in the handwriting of a woman she had never met, the first words of a truth she had waited her entire life to hear began to unfold across the page. The letter was 6 pages long, written on both sides in June's careful hand. Maya read it slowly, sounding out some of the words under her breath the way she used to do as a child when a book was too important to rush. "My dearest Maya," the letter said, "if you are reading this, then you found your way here, just like I always believed you would. I want you to know something before you read another word. You were wanted. You were loved. Every single day of your life, even the days you didn't know I existed. I was thinking about you." June wrote about Lily, about the little girl who used to stand on a step stool in the kitchen and stir whatever was on the stove, whether it needed stirring or not. About the teenager who played guitar on the back porch and sang too loud and burned every batch of cookies she attempted, until one afternoon at 16, something clicked and she started cooking with the confidence of someone twice her age. Lily's food was her language, June wrote. She could say things with a pot of soup that she couldn't say with words. "When your mother died," the letter continued, "I thought the world had ended. She was 28 years old. She was my only child, and I was told that you died with her. Your father called me the day after the accident and said neither of you had survived. I believed him because I had no reason not to. I buried my daughter, and I grieved for you both." Maya stopped reading. She set the letter down and pressed her fingers against her eyes until she saw white sparks. Her father had told June she was dead. He had picked up a phone and told a grieving woman that her granddaughter was gone. And then he had left Maya with his sister and disappeared. She picked the letter back up. "But something never sat right with me," June wrote. "There was no funeral for you, no death certificate I could find in the county records, no grave beside your mother's. When I asked your father for details, the phone number was disconnected. I started asking questions, and nobody had answers. That's when I began to wonder." June described what happened next. She hired a private investigator, a man named Tom Shelby out of Raleigh, who charged $400 a month and sent her reports that were mostly dead ends. She wrote letters to Child Protective Services in 3 counties. She drove to Charlotte and sat in government offices waiting for someone to check records that were sealed or lost or incomplete. She did this for 14 years. "I never found you," June wrote, "but I never stopped looking, and I never believed you were dead. A grandmother knows. I can't explain it any better than that. I knew you were out there, and I knew that one day you would need a place to come home to. So I built one." The letter explained the restaurant. After Lily's death, June had taken the recipes her daughter had created and refined and scribbled on napkins and the backs of grocery lists, and she opened a restaurant with them. Every dish on the menu was something Lily had made. The cornbread was Lily's recipe. The pot roast, the black-eyed peas, the peach cobbler that people drove 30 miles for. All Lily's. "This restaurant is your mother's legacy," June wrote, "and now it's yours. Everything in it belongs to you. The building, the equipment, the recipes, and the love that went into every wall and every plate. Harold next door will explain the practical things. I've left funds to keep the lights on, but the important thing is this: you are not alone. You never were." The letter closed with a single line that Maya read over and over until the words blurred. "I'm sorry I ran out of time. But the door is open. It will always be open. Come home." Maya folded the letter and held it against her chest. The restaurant was quiet. Through the front window, she could see the late afternoon light turning gold on the street outside. Cars passed occasionally. A woman walked a dog. Normal life continued while Maya sat in the ruins of everything she had believed about herself. She had been told she was unwanted, that her mother's family had no interest in her, and instead, there had been a woman in this town spending every spare dollar on private investigators and driving to Charlotte and sitting in waiting rooms, and building a restaurant out of her dead daughter's recipes and leaving a wall blank for photographs of a granddaughter the world said was gone. Maya wiped her face with the back of her hand and stood up. She needed to see the rest of this place. The kitchen was behind the pass-through window, accessible through a swinging door at the end of the counter. Maya pushed through it and stopped. The kitchen was spotless. Stainless steel surfaces gleamed under the fluorescent lights, which flickered to life when she found the switch. A commercial stove with 6 burners and a flat grill sat against the back wall, a double sink, a prep counter, a walk-in cooler that hummed faintly when she pulled the handle, cold and empty but running. On the main prep counter sat a thick 3-ring binder with a laminated cover. The label on the front read, "June's Kitchen Recipes." Maya opened it and felt her breath catch. The pages were organized by category: soups, mains, sides, desserts, breads. Each recipe was written out by hand, but in 2 different styles. The first handwriting was loose and confident, with notes in the margins like, "Needs more salt," and "Double the garlic. Trust me." The second handwriting was June's careful cursive, filling in measurements and cooking times and occasional notes that said things like, "Lily never measured this. I watched her make it 40 times before I got it right." 2 women's voices in a binder. A daughter who cooked by instinct and a mother who translated that instinct into something anyone could follow. Maya turned to the cornbread page. Lily's original note was just 3 lines. Cornmeal, buttermilk, a little sugar, hot skillet. You'll know when it's done. Below that, June had written out the full recipe. 2 cups stone-ground yellow cornmeal, 1 cup buttermilk, a tablespoon of sugar, half a teaspoon of salt, a 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda, cast iron skillet, preheated in the oven at 400 degrees. Pour the batter into the screaming hot skillet, 20 minutes until golden. At the bottom of the page in June's handwriting, this was the first recipe I perfected. It took me 11 tries. On the 12th, Harold from next door ate a piece and said, "That's Lily's cornbread." I sat down and cried. A knock at the front door made Maya jump. She set the binder down and walked back through the dining room. Through the glass, she could see a man on the step. He was old, maybe late 70s, with a full head of white hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from hardwood. He wore a canvas jacket and heavy boots and stood with the slightly bow-legged stance of someone who had spent a lifetime on his feet. His eyes, deep-set and dark, were fixed on Maya's face with an expression she couldn't read. She opened the door. "You look like her," the man said quietly. His voice was rough, the kind that came from decades of not talking much. "You look just like Lily." "Who are you, Harold Perkins? I own the hardware store next door." He paused, studying her. "Well, owned it. I'm retired now. But I've been keeping an eye on this place." His gaze moved past her to the restaurant interior, then back to her face. "June told me you'd come. I promised her I'd be here when you did." Maya stepped aside and let him in. Harold moved through the dining room with the familiarity of someone who had been there 1,000 times. He didn't touch anything, but his eyes lingered on the photographs, on the cover tables, on the counter where June's letter still lay. "You read her letter," he said. It wasn't a question. Yes. Harold lowered himself onto a stool at the counter, the same way a man sits down in his own kitchen. "Then you know the bones of it. She looked for you for a long time." 14 years, Maya said. 14 years. Harold repeated it like he was still counting. "She showed up at my store one Tuesday morning with a box of files. Private investigator reports, letters she'd written to the state, copies of requests she'd filed with courts. She spread them out on my counter and said, 'Harold, I have proof my granddaughter is alive and nobody will listen to me.' I told her I'd listen. And did you believe her?" Harold met her eyes. June Palmer didn't lie, and she didn't chase fantasies. If she said you were alive, I believed her. I just couldn't help her prove it. He explained the practical things. June had set aside money in a separate account before she got sick. Enough to cover the electric bill, water, and basic maintenance for 5 years. Harold had been the one managing it. He came by once a week to check the locks, run the water so the pipes wouldn't seize, mop the floors. He had kept this restaurant breathing for 3 years, waiting for someone who might never come. "Why?" Maya asked. "Because I promised her," Harold said simply. "And because this place matters." It mattered to June and it mattered to this town. When she closed the doors, it felt like someone had turned the lights off on the whole street. He looked at the kitchen pass-through. She made food that made people feel like they belonged somewhere. That's a rare thing. Maya didn't know what to say to that. She stood behind the counter with her garbage bag at her feet and her $41 in her pocket and tried to understand what was happening. 24 hours ago, she had been counting ceiling tiles in a group home. Now she was standing in a restaurant that belonged to her, talking to an old man who had kept a promise to a dead woman for 3 years. "Are you hungry?" Harold asked. The question caught her off guard. "What? Hungry? When did you last eat?" Maya thought about the granola bar on the bus. "This morning." "Sort of." Harold stood up. "Kitchen works. Gas is on. Water's on. There should be dry goods in the pantry." June kept the staples stocked. He moved toward the door. "I'll be back in 20 minutes. I have some things at my place." He left before Maya could object. She stood alone in the restaurant, listening to the silence settle. Then she walked back into the kitchen, opened the pantry, and looked at what was there. Bags of cornmeal and flour sealed in airtight containers, canned goods, beans and tomatoes and broth, salt, pepper, sugar, baking soda. Basic things. But enough. Maya pulled the recipe binder to the prep counter and opened it to the cornbread page. She found a cast-iron skillet hanging on a rack above the stove. She measured cornmeal into a mixing bowl, cracked an egg, poured buttermilk. Her hands remembered motions that her mind had almost forgotten. Mrs. Reeves, the foster mother who had given her the jade pendant, had also taught her to cook. Not fancy things, just basics. How to make biscuits. How to fry an egg without burning the edges. How to fry an egg without burning the edges. How to tell when cornbread was done by the sound it made when you tapped the top. Maya put the skillet in the oven to heat. She mixed the batter with a wooden spoon, feeling the resistance of the cornmeal against the buttermilk. When the oven timer showed 400 degrees, she pulled the skillet out with a towel, poured the batter in, and heard the sizzle that meant the pan was hot enough. She slid it back into the oven and set a timer for 20 minutes. The smell reached the dining room within 5. By 10 minutes it had filled the entire building. A warm, golden smell that was equal parts grain and butter and something harder to name. Comfort, memory. The smell of food made by someone who cared whether you ate. Harold came back carrying a paper bag. He set it on the counter without a word. Inside were 2 jars of homemade blackberry jam, a tub of butter, and a carton of sweet tea. He sat down at the counter and waited. When the timer went off, Maya pulled the cornbread from the oven. It was perfect, golden on top, slightly dark around the edges where the batter had hit the screaming hot iron. She cut it into wedges, set one on a plate, and slid it across the counter to Harold. He didn't speak. He broke the wedge in half, spread butter on one piece, and took a bite. Then he closed his eyes and sat very still. When he opened them, they were wet. "That's her," he said. "That's June." Maya ate standing up, leaning against the prep counter, the way she had eaten in every kitchen she had ever worked in. The cornbread was good, better than good. It tasted like something she had forgotten she knew. They ate in silence until the pan was empty. Harold wiped his hands on a napkin and stood up slowly. "There's an office," he said, through the door behind the kitchen. "June spent a lot of time in there, especially toward the end. You should see it." Maya followed him to a small room behind the kitchen. It held a desk, a filing cabinet, a bookshelf, and a single window that looked out on the back alley. The desk was covered in papers, neatly organized into stacks secured with rubber bands. Harold stood in the doorway. "I'll leave you to it." "But Maya..." He waited until she looked at him. "Home isn't where they keep you. It's where someone kept a place for you." He nodded once and left. Maya sat down at June's desk. The papers told a story that the letter had only outlined. She found the private investigator reports first. Thick manila folders organized by year. The earliest one was dated 14 years ago, just months after Lily's death. The investigator's summary was clinical. Subject claims granddaughter may be alive despite reported death. Initial inquiry shows no death certificate filed in county of accident. Recommend further investigation. She opened folder after folder, dead ends and false leads and invoices for hours of work that produced nothing. Letters June had written to the Department of Social Services, each one more urgent than the last. Form letters that came back saying her inquiry had been noted and would be processed. Copies of requests filed with family courts in 4 counties, all denied or unanswered. 14 years of paper. 14 years of a woman sitting at this desk, writing letters and making phone calls and spending money she probably didn't have, searching for a granddaughter who was alive the entire time, living in foster homes less than 200 miles away. At the bottom of the last folder, Maya found it. A single sheet of paper, a photocopy, partially faded. It was a death certificate. The name on it was Maya Ward. Date of death, the same day as Lily's accident. Cause of death, motor vehicle collision. Filed by Daniel Ward. Her father. Maya stared at the document. Her own name, her own birthday, declared dead at age 4 by a man who had then left her with his sister and vanished. He had killed her on paper, erased her from the one person who would have come for her, who would have taken her home and raised her and loved her. He had told June that her granddaughter was dead, and then he had made it official. The death certificate shook in Maya's hands. She set it down carefully on the desk, pressing the edges flat. 14 years. June had spent 14 years fighting a lie written on this piece of paper. Every investigator who searched for Maya would have found this document and concluded the search was over. The girl was dead. Case closed. And June had refused to accept it. Maya looked around the office, at the stacks of files, at the letters sent and returned, at the photographs pinned to a small corkboard above the desk. Photos of Maya, blurry and distant, taken from what must have been public records or school databases. Yearbook photos. A grainy image of a little girl standing in line at what looked like a food bank. June had found these scraps and collected them, pinned them to her wall, proof that her granddaughter existed somewhere in the world even when the world insisted she didn't. Maya picked up the death certificate again. She held it under the desk lamp and read every line, and then she understood the full shape of it. The lie that had cost her a grandmother. The love that the lie had failed to kill. In the 8 months between June's death and this moment, the distance between being found and being too late, stretching out in front of her with a weight she could feel in her chest. Maya did not sleep that night. She sat at June's desk until the light from the window faded to black, and then she sat in the dark. The death certificate lay face down on the desk where she had placed it. She did not need to read it again. The words were already carved into her. Sometime after midnight, she moved to the dining room. She sat in one of the wooden chairs and pulled her knees to her chest and looked at the photographs on the wall. Her mother's face, repeated in frame after frame, watched her from the shadows. The streetlight outside threw a pale rectangle across the floor, and Maya sat in it like it was warmth. She thought about her father, Daniel Ward, the man who had driven away when she was 6, leaving her with Diane, and never come back. Maya had spent years hating him for leaving. Now she understood that leaving was the smallest thing he had done. He had called June. He had told her that Maya was dead, and then he had filed a piece of paper that turned the lie into something official, something that would stop anyone from looking. He had not just abandoned his daughter, he had erased her, and Diane had known. Maya's aunt, the woman who had kept her for 11 months before surrendering her to the state, had known the lie existed and never corrected it. Never picked up the phone and called June and said, "Your granddaughter is alive, she's in Charlotte, come get her." Maya pressed her forehead against her knees. 14 years in foster homes while a woman 200 miles south spent every spare dollar trying to find her. 7 families, 7 bedrooms that were never hers. 7 kitchens where she learned to cook and clean and make herself useful because useful children got to stay longer, and the whole time there was a grandmother who wanted her. A restaurant with her name on the wall, a door waiting to be opened. She cried in the dark, quietly, with the discipline of someone who had learned in group homes that noise meant attention and attention was never good. When the sky outside the window began to lighten, Maya wiped her face and stood up. Her body was stiff from sitting all night. She walked to the kitchen, turned on the tap, and splashed cold water on her face. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The stainless steel surfaces reflected her back at herself, a tired girl with swollen eyes standing in a dead woman's kitchen. The front door opened just after 7. She did not move. She already knew who it was. Harold came through the dining room carrying 2 paper cups and a small brown bag. He set them on the counter and looked at her through the pass-through window. He did not say good morning. He did not ask how she slept. He just said, "Coffee's black. Didn't know how you'd take it. There's sugar in the bag." Maya came out of the kitchen and sat at the counter. The coffee was hot and strong, and she drank half of it before she spoke. "He told her I was dead." "I know," Harold said. He filed a death certificate, with my name on it. Harold nodded slowly. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup and looked at the counter. "June showed me that document 6 years ago. She'd gotten a copy through one of her court filings. She sat right where you're sitting and she said, 'Harold, someone forged my granddaughter's death.' I told her to take it to a lawyer. She did. The lawyer said it would take years to untangle, and even if she proved the certificate was false, there was no guarantee the state would help her find a living child in the foster system. But she kept looking. She kept looking." Harold took a slow drink of his coffee. 14 years of looking for a girl the world told her was dead, and she never stopped. They sat in silence for a while. Morning light came through the front window and caught the dust in the air. "Tell me about her," Maya said. Harold set his cup down. "June was stubborn. That's the first thing you need to know. Most stubborn woman I ever met, and I was married to a woman who once refused to leave a hospital waiting room for 36 hours because the doctors told her she couldn't see her sister. June was worse. When she decided something was true, no amount of evidence was going to change her mind. And she decided you were alive." "How did she start the restaurant?" "After Lily died, June fell apart. Stopped going out, stopped answering her phone. I'd check on her every few days and she'd be sitting in her kitchen, surrounded by Lily's recipe cards, just reading them over and over. Then one morning she came into my store and said, 'Harold, I need to rent the building next door.' I told her it had been empty for 2 years and the owner would probably sell it cheap. She bought it for $12,000. Paid cash. I don't know where she got the money. She never told me, and I never asked. And she cooked Lily's recipes. Every single one. She spent a year getting them right. Lily never wrote things down properly. She'd scribble some flour and cook until it smells right. June had to stand in that kitchen and make every dish dozens of times until she could taste her daughter in it. Harold paused. His voice dropped. She didn't cook to fill the restaurant. She cooked so the smell would carry. So wherever you were, some part of you might remember. Maya looked at the photographs on the wall. Her mother's face, young and laughing, flower on her nose. Was the restaurant busy? Packed. Every lunch, every dinner. People came from 3 counties. June's cornbread was famous. Her pot roast was the best thing I've ever eaten. And my wife was no slouch in the kitchen. His voice softened when he mentioned his wife. June ran this place for 17 years. She was here 6 days a week, open to close. Knew every regular by name. Knew who was having a hard time, and she'd slide an extra piece of cobbler onto their plate without saying anything about it. When did she get sick? Harold's jaw tightened. About 4 years ago, pancreatic cancer. By the time they found it, there wasn't much to do. She kept cooking for as long as she could. When she couldn't stand at the stove anymore, she sat in the office and directed me. I'm a terrible cook, but she talked me through things well enough to keep the doors open for another few months. And then she closed. 3 years ago, this past January, she called me over and said, "Harold, I can't do this anymore, but don't you dare let this building fall apart." She's coming. I told her I'd take care of it, and I did. Maya finished her coffee. She looked around the dining room, at the clean tables and washed windows and photographs that Harold had dusted every week for 3 years. "I need to do something," she said. "Like what?" "I don't know. Something with my hands." Harold studied her for a moment. Then he stood up. "Cleaning supplies in the back closet. Mop, bucket, rags. The floors are due." He left her to it. Maya found the closet, filled a bucket with hot water and soap, and started mopping. She began in the kitchen because it felt right, working the mop across the floor in long, steady strokes. The physical motion loosened something in her chest that had been wound tight all night. She scrubbed the prep counters. She wiped down the stove burners. She cleaned the inside of the walk-in cooler, which was empty except for a box of baking soda Harold had placed on the shelf. In the dining room, she mopped every inch of the floor, moving chairs aside, working around the counter stools. She washed the windows with vinegar and newspaper. She wiped down each framed photograph, lifting them off the wall, one at a time, cleaning the glass, hanging them back. By noon, her arms ached and her back was sore, and the restaurant smelled like lemon soap and clean wood. She stood in the middle of the dining room and felt, for the first time in years, like she had done something that mattered. A knock at the door. Maya opened it and found a woman on the step. She was in her 50s, broad-shouldered, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She carried a cardboard box. "You must be Maya," the woman said. "I'm Ruth. I run the diner across the street. Harold told me you were here." "He did." Harold told everyone. "I think he's been waiting 3 years to make that phone call." Ruth shifted the box in her arms. "I brought you some things. Food, mostly, and some cleaning supplies, though it looks like you found your own." Maya took the box. Inside were containers of soup and rice, a loaf of bread, apples, a bag of potatoes, dish soap, sponges, and a package of paper towels. At the bottom was a folded dish towel with a note pinned to it that read, "June would be proud. Welcome home." "Thank you," Maya said, and her voice cracked on the second word. Ruth stepped inside without waiting, the way people in small towns do when they know they belong. She looked around the dining room and nodded. "You've been busy. This place looks good." She ran her hand along the counter. "I used to eat here twice a week. June made a black-eyed pea soup that I have tried to replicate for 3 years and cannot get right." "It's in the recipe binder," Maya said. Ruth's eyes lit up. "Don't you dare show me. I'm not ready to admit defeat." She paused. "Listen, Maya. I know you just got here and you're probably overwhelmed. But this town cared about June, and they're going to care about June, and they're going to care about you. Give them a chance." She left as easily as she had arrived. Maya stood in the doorway and watched her cross the street to the diner. A woman who had brought food and kindness to a stranger because someone she loved had asked her to look out for this place. If you've made it this far into Maya's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. Maya put the food away and went back to the office. She had been avoiding it since the night before, since the death certificate, but now she sat down at June's desk and opened the filing cabinet. The top drawer held the investigator files she had already seen. The second drawer held tax records and business documents. The third drawer held something she had not expected. A journal, black leather cover worn soft at the edges, with a ribbon bookmark. Maya opened it to the first page. The date was 14 years ago. The handwriting was June's careful cursive. Started looking for Maya today. Called Tom and asked him to search the foster care records in Mecklenburg County. He said it could take months. I told him I had years. Maya turned the pages slowly. The journal was a record of June's search, written in the margins of her daily life. Entries about the restaurant sat alongside entries about dead-end leads and unanswered letters. Peach cobbler recipe finally right. Lily would have added more cinnamon. She was always wrong about cinnamon. Tom called. No records in Mecklenburg. Trying Cabarrus County next. A woman came in today with her granddaughter. The little girl sat at the counter and ate cornbread with jam and talked about school. I went into the kitchen and cried for 10 minutes. Filed another request with DSS. Third one this year. They sent back the same form letter. Maya read for an hour. The entries spanned years. Some months had daily entries. Others had gaps of weeks, followed by a burst of activity when a new lead surfaced. June wrote about the restaurant and the search with equal attention, keeping Lily's memory alive and finding Lily's daughter. Two halves of the same work. The entries from the last 2 years were different. The handwriting grew less steady. The entries grew shorter. June wrote about doctor's appointments and test results with the same matter-of-fact tone she used for everything else. 6 months to a year, the doctor says. I told him I need 2. He said he'd do his best. Can't stand at the stove for more than 20 minutes now. Harold comes in and helps. He burns everything, but he tries. Good man. Wrote another letter to the court in Wake County. Probably my last one. Running out of time and postage. Maya found the entry she had been dreading without knowing it. The date was 10 months before June died. The handwriting was shaky but legible. I am not going to find her. I know that now. I have spent 14 years and more money than I should have, and written more letters than I can count, and I am not going to find my granddaughter before I die. But I am not going to stop believing she is alive, and I am not going to stop leaving the door open. Harold will keep this place standing. The recipes are in the binder. The photographs are on the wall. If she comes in 10 years or 20, this place will be waiting. I only wish I could be the one to hand her the key. Maya closed the journal. She held it against her chest, pressing the words of a woman she had never met against her heart because it was the closest she could get to holding the woman herself. She put her head down on the desk and cried. Not quietly this time. The sound filled the small office and leaked through the door into the kitchen and the dining room beyond. She cried for June, who had spent 14 years reaching for her and died 8 months short. She cried for Lily, the mother she could not remember, whose recipes filled a binder in the kitchen. And she cried for herself, for the girl who had counted ceiling tiles and believed she was unwanted, who had carried a garbage bag through 7 homes and never known that someone was looking for her the entire time. Harold found her. He did not knock. He just appeared in the doorway the same way he must have appeared in this doorway 100 times when June was sitting at this desk. He pulled the other chair over and sat down beside her. She wrote about you, Maya said when she could speak. Every week. For 14 years, I know. She read parts of it to me sometimes. She knew she wasn't going to find me. She wrote it down. But she kept the restaurant ready anyway. Harold was quiet for a long moment. June told me once that hope wasn't about expecting things to work out. She said hope was about refusing to close the door, even when you couldn't see anyone coming through it. I wish I'd known her. You do know her, Harold said. She's in every wall of this building. She's in that binder in the kitchen. She's in the photographs and the letters and the files in that cabinet. June spent 20 years putting herself into this place. You didn't miss her, Maya. She's right here. Maya looked at the journal in her hands, at the desk covered in papers, at the corkboard with its blurry photographs of a girl in foster care who nobody knew was being searched for. I want to open it, she said. Harold looked at her. Open what? The restaurant. I want to open it again. He did not answer right away. He sat back in his chair and studied her with those deep-set eyes. You know how to cook. I know enough. And I have the recipes. Running a restaurant is more than cooking. It's supply orders and health inspections and staffing and keeping the books and 100 things June made look easy that aren't. I know. You're 18 years old. I know that too. Harold rubbed the back of his neck. A slow smile spread across his face, the first one Maya had seen from him. It changed his whole expression. June said you'd be stubborn, she said. If that girl is anything like her mother, she'll walk in and start cooking before the door swings shut. I think she was right. Will you help me? I promised June I'd be here when you came. I didn't put a time limit on that promise. Maya nodded. She set the journal down on the desk and stood up. Through the window she could see the back alley, a narrow strip of cracked pavement with weeds growing through the cracks. Not much to look at. But it was hers. There's one more thing, she said. I need to find my aunt. Harold's expression shifted. Diane, you know about her. June mentioned her, your father's sister, the one who gave you to the state. She's also the one who knew the death certificate was fake and never said anything. Harold was quiet. I need to know why, Maya said. I need to hear her say it. And then what? Maya did not have an answer. She did not know what she would do when she stood in front of the woman who had known the truth and kept it buried for 12 years. Whether she would shout or cry or walk away or do something she had not imagined yet. All she knew was that the question was sitting in her chest like a stone, and it was not going to move until she asked it. I'm going to call the lawyer, she said, Mr. Harrison. He found me. He can find her. Harold stood up and moved toward the door. He stopped in the frame and looked back. Maya, yeah, your grandmother would have liked you. He left. Maya sat at the desk and pulled the lawyer's letter from the stack of papers. She found the phone number at the bottom. She picked up her phone and stared at the 10 digits. Somewhere on the other end of those numbers was a path to Diane Ward, a woman who owed her an answer, a woman who might not want to give one. Maya dialed. The lawyer's office answered on the third ring. A woman's voice, professional and warm, told Maya that Mr. Harrison was with a client, but could return her call within the hour. Maya left her number and hung up. She sat at June's desk and waited, her hand still resting on the phone. He called back in 40 minutes. His voice was calm, measured, the voice of a man who delivered complicated news for a living. Miss Ward, I'm glad you called. I take it you've arrived in Millbrook. I'm at the restaurant. Good. Good. A pause. I imagine you have questions. I need to find my aunt, Diane Ward. She lives in Raleigh. Or she did. Harrison was quiet for a moment. I can look into that. June's file had some information on your father's family. Give me a day or two. Can you also tell me something? How did June know where to send the letter? To the library? She didn't, Harrison said. That was my work. June gave me your full name and date of birth and asked me to find you when you turned 18. She said the foster system would release you at that age and you'd need somewhere to go. I tracked you through public records. The Charlotte Library came up as a mailing address you'd used for a GED study program. Maya closed her eyes. Even from beyond the grave, June had been reaching for her. I'll call you about Diane, Harrison said. And Maya, if you need anything with the property, any legal questions, June prepaid my services for a full year. Don't hesitate. She thanked him and hung up. Then she went to the kitchen and opened the recipe binder and started reading. Harrison called back the next evening with Diane's phone number. Maya wrote it on the back of a napkin and carried it in her pocket for 2 days before she used it. During those 2 days, the restaurant began to change. Harold arrived the first morning with a toolbox and a man from the church, whose name Maya never learned. They spent 4 hours fixing the front door hinge, which had been sticking, and replacing 2 ceiling tiles that had started to bow from moisture. The man from the church looked at the painted sign above the entrance and said, I can touch that. The green's fading. Harold told him to go ahead. Ruth came by with a box of kitchen supplies. Mixing bowls, wooden spoons, a set of sharp knives and a canvas roll. These were sitting in my storage room, she said. I'd rather they get used. Maya suspected they were not from a storage room, but she accepted them without argument. A woman Maya had never met dropped off a flat of eggs and a gallon of whole milk. She said her name was Carol and she had a farm outside of town, and June used to buy eggs from her every week. I've got more than I can sell, Carol said. I'll bring some by on Tuesdays. By the second evening, the restaurant looked different. The front door swung smoothly. The ceiling was patched. Fresh green paint gleamed on the sign above the entrance. Someone had left a potted plant by the front step. The walk-in cooler, which had been empty for 3 years, now held eggs and milk and butter and a bag of apples. Maya stood in the middle of the dining room and tried to understand what was happening. She had been in this town for 3 days. She had not asked anyone for anything. And yet people she had never met were bringing food and fixing things and treating this building like it mattered to them personally. Harold explained it simply. June fed this town for 17 years. You think they forgot that? On the third evening, Maya pulled the napkin from her pocket. She sat on the concrete step outside the front door with the last of the daylight fading and her phone in her hand. She had rehearsed what she would say a dozen times. None of the versions sounded right. She dialed. The phone rang 4 times. 5. Maya was about to hang up when a woman answered. Hello. The voice was cautious, tired. Diane. Silence. Then, barely above a whisper. Maya, how did you know? Because nobody else would call me and sound like that. A long breath. I've been waiting for this call. I didn't know when. But I knew it would come. Maya gripped the phone. Her throat was tight. I'm in Millbrook, at June's restaurant. I know about the restaurant, Diane said. I heard June died. I didn't go to the funeral. Why not? Diane didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was flat. 'Cause I didn't have the right. I knew what your father did. I knew what that woman spent her life doing. And I let it happen. I need you to come here, Maya said. I need you to tell me why. Another silence, longer this time. Maya could hear something in the background, a television or a radio, the muffled noise of a life being lived in a small space. When? Diane asked. Saturday. I'll be there. The line went dead. Maya set the phone down on the step beside her. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the concrete until they stopped. Harold found her there 10 minutes later. He sat down on the step without asking and looked out at the street. The town was quiet. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. You called her, he said. She's coming Saturday. Harold nodded. He didn't say whether he thought it was a good idea or a bad one. He just sat with her until the streetlights came on, and then he stood up and said, Lock up when you go in. I'll see you in the morning. The days between the phone call and Saturday were the busiest of Maya's life. She cooked every recipe in the binder, working through the categories one by one. Soups first. She made a pot of black-eyed pea soup and brought a container to Ruth, who tasted it standing behind her diner counter and said, That's it. That's the one. How much garlic? The recipe says 4 cloves. I use 6. Ruth shook her head. June and her secrets. She told me 3. Maya made the pot roast, which took 4 hours and filled the restaurant with a smell so rich that Harold came through the front door without knocking and said, I could smell that from my porch. She made the peach cobbler, which needed 2 attempts because the first one came out too sweet. The second was right. She knew it was right because she tasted it and felt something click, the same way June had described Lily's cooking. Not a recipe followed, but a feeling recognized. She cleaned every surface twice. She organized the pantry. She ordered supplies from a wholesale company in the next town. Using money from the account June had left, Harold drove her to the county health department to start the inspection paperwork. The inspector, a man who had eaten at June's kitchen for years, told her the kitchen was already in better shape than most restaurants he visited. June kept his place surgical, he said. Looks like you do too. On Friday evening, Maya was washing dishes when she heard a car pull up outside. It was too early for Diane. She dried her hands and went to the front window. A modest sedan sat at the curb, dusty from highway driving. The woman behind the wheel sat still for a long time before she opened the door. Diane Ward was smaller than Maya had imagined. Late 40s, but she looked older, thin, with graying hair cut short and deep lines around her mouth. She wore a plain blouse and slacks and carried a purse that she clutched with both hands like it was the only thing keeping her upright. She stood on the sidewalk and looked at the restaurant sign and did not move. Maya opened the front door. They stared at each other. Maya had expected to feel rage. She had expected the sight of this woman to unlock something violent and raw, the anger she had carried for years about being given up, about being forgotten, about being lied to. But what she felt was quieter than that. She felt tired. She felt like she was looking at someone who was already punishing herself more than Maya ever could. You came early, Maya said. I couldn't sleep. Diane's eyes moved from Maya's face to the restaurant behind her and back. You look like Lily. Everyone must tell you that. Come in. Diane walked through the door slowly, her eyes moving across the dining room, the photographs, the counter, the kitchen beyond the pass-through. She stopped in front of a photograph of Lily holding baby Maya in the yellow blanket. She was a good mother, Diane said. Your mama loved you more than anything in this world. I want you to know that. Sit down, Maya said. Diane sat at the counter. Maya stood behind it. The counter between them felt necessary, a barrier that allowed proximity without closeness. Tell me, Maya said. Diane set her purse on the counter and folded her hands. She looked at them while she talked. When your father left you with me, I was a mess. My husband had just walked out. I was behind on rent. I was drinking too much. I told Danny I couldn't take care of a child, and he said it would only be for a few weeks. He left, and he never came back. When did he tell June I was dead? Right after the accident. He called her the day after Lily died and told her neither of you survived. I didn't find out about the call until later. A year, maybe. By then, you were already in the system. And when you found out, Diane's hands tightened on each other. I told myself it was too late, that the lie was already done and undoing it wouldn't help anybody. June thought you were dead, and you were in foster care, and I convinced myself you were better off with the state than with me or with a grandmother you didn't know. Her voice cracked. I was wrong? I knew I was wrong even then. But admitting it meant admitting what I'd done, that I'd given up my brother's daughter because I couldn't handle it, and I couldn't face that. You knew June was looking for me. Diane's head dropped. I heard. Through people. I heard she hired investigators, that she was writing letters. I told myself she'd give up. She didn't. No, Maya said. She didn't. I wasn't strong enough to keep you, and I wasn't brave enough to tell the truth. Those are different kinds of wrong, but they're both mine. Maya looked at this woman, this small, broken woman sitting on a stool in a dead woman's restaurant, confessing sins she had carried for over a decade. Diane was not a villain. She was not the monster Maya had constructed in her mind during all those years in foster homes. She was a person who had been handed something she could not carry, and had set it down and walked away and spent every day since knowing she should have tried harder. Maya did not forgive her. The word felt too large, too final for what she was feeling. But she did not send her away. Are you hungry? Maya asked. Diane looked up. Her eyes were red. What? I'm going to cook. You can stay if you want. Diane nodded. She did not trust herself to speak. Maya went into the kitchen and started pulling things from the pantry and the cooler. She moved without thinking about it, her hands reaching for ingredients with a certainty that surprised her. She set a pot on the stove for soup. She pulled out the cast-iron skillet for cornbread. She started chopping onions, and the burn in her eyes gave her an excuse not to look at anyone. After 10 minutes, Diane appeared in the kitchen doorway. She stood there, uncertain, until Maya pointed at a cutting board and a pile of carrots. Peel those. Diane picked up the peeler. They worked side by side in silence, the only sounds the knife on the cutting board and the pot beginning to bubble. After a while, Diane spoke. Lily used to hum when she cooked. Did anyone ever tell you that? No. She'd hum the same 3 songs over and over. Church hymns, mostly. She couldn't carry a tune to save her life, but she'd hum so loud you could hear her from the porch. Maya kept chopping. What else? She burned everything when she started. I mean everything. Toast, eggs, rice. Your grandmother almost banned her from the kitchen. Then one day, something changed. She walked in and started making this pot roast, and it was perfect. First try. June said it was like watching someone remember how to speak a language they'd known in another life. She sounds like someone I would have liked, Maya said. She would have been crazy about you, Diane said quietly. She talked about you every single day, what you'd be like when you grew up, what you'd want to do. She had plans for the 2 of you. Diane set the peeler down. I took those plans away from her. I know that. I'll know it for the rest of my life. Harold arrived at 6 with Ruth behind him. Ruth carried a pie. Harold carried nothing but himself, which was enough. They came through the door and found Maya and Diane in the kitchen, standing 3 feet apart, cooking in a silence that was not comfortable, but was not hostile either. Ruth assessed the situation in 2 seconds and said, "Smells like June's soup. Who's hungry?" They ate at the counter, the 4 of them. Sitting on stools with bowls of black-eyed pea soup and squares of cornbread and glasses of sweet tea that Ruth had brought from her diner, Harold ate 2 bowls and did not comment on the food because the eating said everything. Ruth told stories about June's regular customers. Diane listened, her soup growing cold in front of her, absorbing every detail about the woman she had wronged. After dinner, Harold and Ruth left together. Harold shook Diane's hand at the door. He held it for a long moment and said nothing, but his eyes said plenty. Maya walked Diane to her car. The street was dark and quiet. Diane stood with her keys in her hand and looked at the restaurant one more time. "Can I come back?" she asked. "Tomorrow. For the opening. It's not a real opening. Just a few people. A test." Maya looked at her, at this woman who had failed her in every way that mattered and who was standing on a sidewalk asking permission to be present. It would have been easy to say no. It would have been justified. But June had spent 20 years leaving doors open, and Maya was beginning to understand why. "Be here at 11, she said. Diane got in her car and drove away. Maya watched the taillights disappear around the corner, then turned back to the restaurant. Through the front window she could see the photographs on the wall, lit by the single lamp she had left on. Her mother's face repeated in frame after frame, the empty wall with the corkboard note, the counter where 4 people had just shared a meal. She went inside and sat at the counter alone. She picked up the photograph of June, the one from the envelope, the silver-haired woman standing in the doorway with her arms open wide. Maya held it up and looked from the photograph to the dining room and back. "I don't know if I'm doing this right," she said to the empty room. "But I'm doing it." She set the photograph on the counter propped against the register where June had left the original envelope. Then she pulled the recipe binder toward her and opened it to the first page and started making a list of everything she would need for tomorrow. Maya woke up at 5 the next morning in the small room behind the office. She had found it on her second day, a narrow space with a cot and a shelf and a window that looked out on the back alley. June had slept here sometimes, Harold told her, on nights when she closed late and did not feel like driving home. Maya had been sleeping here since she arrived, her garbage bag in the corner, her backpack on the shelf, the jade pendant on the windowsill where it caught the first light. She dressed and went to the kitchen. The stove was cold. The prep counter was clean. The recipe binder sat where she had left it the night before, open to a page of notes she had made about quantities and timing. She ran her hand across the laminated cover and took a breath. Today she was opening June's kitchen. She started the coffee maker first. Then she pulled the cast iron skillet from the rack and set it on the stove. She measured cornmeal and buttermilk and cracked an egg and mixed the batter with the wooden spoon that had been hanging on a hook since before she was born. She preheated the oven and slid the skillet in to get hot. While it heated, she started the soup. Black-eyed peas, onions, garlic broth. The recipe was June's translation of Lily's instinct, precise measurements where Lily had used handfuls, written times where Lily had used her nose. By 7, the restaurant smelled like cornbread and coffee and onions sweating in butter. Maya stood at the stove and listened to the sounds of the kitchen. The pop of grease, the simmer of broth, the hum of the cooler. She had spent years in other people's kitchens, peeling potatoes and washing dishes, learning to cook in stolen minutes between chores. This was the first kitchen that belonged to her. Harold arrived at 7:30. He came through the front door and sat at the counter in the same spot, third stool from the left without being told. Maya poured him coffee and set a square of cornbread in front of him. He ate it slowly, methodically, the way he did everything. "How many are you expecting?" he asked. "I don't know." Ruth said she'd spread the word. Maybe 10, maybe 20. June's record was 63 in one lunch service. She ran out of cobbler and people sat there waiting for the next batch. She was 71 years old and she made 4 more cobblers that afternoon. Maya smiled. It was small and tired, but it was real. "I'm not making 4 cobblers. You'll make what you need to make," Harold said. That's what June always did. Ruth arrived at 8 with a tablecloth she said was extra but looked brand new. She helped Maya set the tables, smoothing the cloths over the plastic covers, straightening the salt and pepper shakers, adjusting the chairs. The two of them worked without talking much, moving around each other with an ease that surprised Maya. She had known this woman for less than a week. "I called a few people," Ruth said. "Don't be shocked if more show up than you planned for." At 10:30, Diane's car pulled up outside. Maya watched through the window as Diane sat in the driver's seat for a full minute before getting out. She was wearing a nicer blouse than the day before. She had put on lipstick. Small gestures, Maya thought. Small efforts from a woman who was not sure she deserved to be here. Diane came through the door and stood near the entrance, waiting. Maya looked at her from behind the counter. "There's an apron on the hook by the kitchen door," Maya said. "If you want to help." Diane put on the apron. She went to the kitchen and stood at the prep counter and waited for instructions. Maya told her to slice bread and arrange it in baskets. Diane did it carefully, precisely, the way someone works when they know they are being given a chance they have not earned. At 11, Maya unlocked the front door and propped it open. The spring air came in, cool and sweet, carrying the smell of cut grass from somewhere down the street. She stood in the doorway and looked out at Sycamore Street. It was Saturday morning. The town was awake but unhurried. An older couple walked past on the sidewalk and the woman stopped. "Is this place opening again?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." The woman grabbed her husband's arm. "Frank, June's kitchen is opening." She turned back to Maya. "We'll be right back. We're getting our daughter." They were the first. By noon, 14 people sat at the tables and the counter. Some of them Maya had never seen. Others she recognized from the past week. The woman who had brought eggs, a man who had stopped by to ask about the sign. Ruth sat at a corner table and watched the room with quiet satisfaction. Harold stayed at the counter. He did not help serve. He did not offer suggestions. He sat on his stool and drank coffee and watched Maya move between the kitchen and the dining room, carrying plates of food to people who had come because they remembered June and wanted to see what her granddaughter could do. Maya served the soup first, then cornbread with butter and blackberry jam, then pot roast with carrots and potatoes. She cooked in batches, working the stove with a focus that shut out everything else. When a plate came back empty, she felt it in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the stove. An older man at table 4 ate his pot roast in silence, then set down his fork and said to nobody in particular, "That's Lily's pot roast. I'd know it anywhere." The woman beside him put her hand on his arm and they sat there together, remembering. Diane carried plates from the kitchen to the dining room. She did not speak to the customers. She set the food down gently and retreated, a presence that was felt but not imposed. Once, she paused beside the photographs on the wall and looked at the picture of Lily holding baby Maya. She stood there for a long time. Nobody said anything to her. The town did not know who she was. And that was fine. She was not here for the town. She was here for Maya. Around 1 o'clock, when the lunch rush had settled into the comfortable hum of full stomachs and second cups of coffee, the front door opened and a young woman walked in. She was maybe 16, thin, wearing a jacket too light for the weather. She stood just inside the door and looked around with the wide, careful eyes of someone assessing whether a place was safe. Maya recognized that look instantly. She had worn it every time she walked into a new foster home. The girl did not sit down. She stood near the door, her hands shoved in her pockets, her eyes moving from the photographs to the counter to the kitchen pass-through and back. Maya came out from behind the counter. "You hungry?" The girl nodded. "Sit wherever you want." The girl chose the stool at the far end of the counter, the one closest to the door. Maya brought her a bowl of soup and a thick square of cornbread and a glass of sweet tea. She set it down without ceremony and went back to the kitchen. She did not hover. She did not ask questions. She had been that girl enough times to know that what you need first is food, and what you need second is to be left alone to eat it. The girl ate everything. She ate slowly at first, then faster, the way people eat when they are not sure where the next meal is coming from. When the bowl was empty, Maya refilled it without being asked. Harold watched this from his spot at the counter. He did not say anything, but his eyes moved from Maya to the girl and back, and something settled in his expression that looked like recognition. When the girl finished the second bowl, Maya sat down on the stool beside her. "What's your name?" "Jessie." "Not really. I'm from Ashboro. I'm staying with my cousin, but she's not home much." Maya looked at this girl, this child with her thin jacket and careful eyes, and her elbows on the counter of a restaurant she had walked into because the door was open and the food smelled good. She saw herself, not a mirror, not an exact copy, but the same essential thing. A kid who needed someone to leave a door open. "I'm going to need help around here," Maya said. "Washing dishes, sweeping floors. Can't pay much yet, but you get fed." Jessie's eyes widened. "You serious?" "I'm serious. I can wash dishes." "Good. Come by Monday after school." Jessie left with a container of soup and half a loaf of cornbread wrapped in foil. Maya watched her go and felt the full weight of what June had built settle onto her shoulders. Not a burden, a purpose. The afternoon wound down slowly. People finished eating and left in 2s and 3s, stopping at the door to tell Maya the food was good, that June would have been proud, that they would be back. By 3 o'clock, only Harold and Ruth remained. Ruth stood up and collected her things. She stopped beside Maya at the counter. Everyone who walks through that door is family. That's what June always said. I think she was right about that. She squeezed Maya's arm and left. Harold stayed. He finished his coffee and set the cup down and looked at Maya with those deep-set eyes. I want to say something, he said, and then I'm going home. Maya nodded. Harold straightened on his stool. He was not a man who made speeches. His words came out plain and direct, without decoration. June kept this restaurant alive for 17 years, not because she needed the money or wanted the attention. She kept it alive because she believed her granddaughter would walk through that door someday. People told her she was foolish. The investigators told her to stop. The courts told her there was nothing to find. And she kept the lights on anyway. He paused. You are never too late if the light's still on. And June kept that light on for 18 years. He stood up, put on his jacket, and walked out the front door. Maya watched him cross the sidewalk and turn the corner toward his house. Then she turned off the dining room lights and went to the kitchen and started washing dishes. 3 months later, June's kitchen was open, 5 days a week. Maya cooked lunch and dinner, Tuesdays through Saturdays. The menu was small, 8 items from Lily's recipes, and it changed only when Maya felt confident enough to add something new. The black-eyed pea soup was the most popular. The cornbread was the most talked about. The peach cobbler, which Maya had finally perfected on her 6th attempt, was the thing people drove from other towns to eat. She lived in the small room behind the office. She had bought a real bed to replace the cot, and a dresser from a second-hand store, and a lamp for the nightstand. The garbage bag was gone. Her clothes hung in a narrow closet that Harold had built from scrap lumber on a Tuesday afternoon, without being asked. Harold came every morning at 7:30 for coffee. He sat in the same spot, third stool from the left, and read the newspaper and did not talk unless he had something to say. Some mornings they sat in silence for an hour. Those were good mornings too. Ruth sent customers across the street when her diner was full. She never asked for anything in return. Once a month, she and Maya cooked together in June's kitchen after hours, working through Lily's recipes, trading tips, arguing about garlic. Diane came on Saturdays. She drove down from Raleigh in the morning and worked the lunch shift, clearing tables and washing dishes, and doing whatever Maya needed. They did not talk about the past. They did not talk about the past. They did not talk about forgiveness. They talked about the food and the customers and the weather. And sometimes Diane told Maya a story about Lily, a small detail that made her mother reel. What Lily's laugh sounded like, how she sang off-key in the car, the way she used to put hot sauce on everything, including cereal, which June thought was an abomination. Maya did not call Diane family. Not yet, but she did not turn her away. Jessie came after school on weekdays. She washed dishes and swept floors and ate dinner at the counter before going home. She was quiet, the way Maya had been quiet, and she worked hard without being told. One afternoon, Maya found her in the office reading June's journal. Jessie looked up, startled, expecting to be scolded. "It's okay," Maya said. She'd want people to read it. On a Tuesday evening in June, after the last customer left and the kitchen was clean, Maya sat down at the desk in the office. She pulled a piece of paper from the printer and picked up a pen. She wrote, "Dear June, my name is Maya. I'm your granddaughter. I'm sorry it took me so long to get here. The door was open, just like you said. The recipes are in the binder. The photographs are on the wall. Harold is at the counter every morning. The town remembers you. I remember you too, even though we never met. I remember you because you left yourself in every corner of this place. In every recipe, in every photograph, and every letter you wrote trying to find me. You looked for me for 14 years. I'm here now. I came home." She folded the letter and placed it in the filing cabinet, in the drawer with June's journal, beside the 14 years of investigator reports and court filings and unanswered letters. One more piece of paper and a drawer full of them. But this one was different. This one was an answer. Maya turned off the office light and walked through the kitchen and the dining room to the front door. The restaurant was dark and quiet. Photographs of her mother lined the walls. The empty section, the one June had reserved for Maya's pictures, was no longer empty. Harold had taken a photograph of Maya on opening day, standing behind the counter with a dish towel over her shoulder and flour on her hands. It hung in the center of the wall, the first picture in a space that had been waiting for 18 years. Maya locked the front door from the inside. The same lock, the same brass key. She checked the stove, checked the cooler, wiped down the counter. One more time. Then she went to the small room behind the office and lay down on her bed and listened to the building settle around her. The creak of old wood, the hum of the cooler, the faint smell of cornbread that never quite left the walls. In the morning, she would wake up early. She would start the coffee and heat the skillet and mix the batter and open the front door. Harold would come at 7:30. The town would come after that. Jessie would come after school. And one by one, the tables would fill with people who came because the food was good and the door was open, and the woman behind the counter understood that a meal shared is never just a meal. The key sat on the nightstand beside the jade pendant. Two small objects, one from each side of her family. One from a mother she could not remember, and one from a grandmother she had never met. Both given to her by women who loved her before she knew she was loved. Maya closed her eyes. The restaurant was quiet. The door was locked, but it was not closed. It would never be closed again.